Good morning, class. I hope all is well. Today, we talk about edTPA and how the knowledge of language objectives is assessed through edTPA. We know that language objectives are set to support students' language development so that they can access the content. And as edTPA is a teacher performance assessment measure, it assesses your ability to develop language objectives based on your content area and your students' needs. So what you learned last class and the assignment you turned in were both in line with this requirement. However, there is a small formatting issue that you need to know. First, in your text, you learned that there are 5 categories of language needs: vocabulary, functions, grammar, discourse, and language learning strategies. And the authors had their own arguments why these areas are considered needs. The first difference between your chapter and edTPA is that edTPA calls these areas demands. In other words, the content area demands vocabulary, demands functions, demands syntax, demands discourse, while in the text they are referred to as needs. As you can see, this is a terminology issue: needs versus demands. The second difference is the way that language learning strategies are viewed. In the text, the authors refer to strategies as systematic plans to learn the language, and they argue that students need strategies to learn. Strategies such as determining patterns, previewing text, taking notes, etc. We can agree that is a valid argument. Students require language learning strategies in order to learn the language, and the teachers can teach them about these strategies so that they can meet the language objectives. And this is exactly what edTPA knows as planned language supports. So while edTPA does not consider language learning strategies as language needs, it still considers them as planned language supports which need to be devised by the teachers and provided to the students so that they can meet the language objectives. So practically, as you can see, they're looking at two sides of the same coin. The text sees language learning strategies as needs, and that is true. They are in fact needs. Students require them to learn the language. But a TPA looks at how you, as a teacher, use strategies to support your students' language learning development. Let's look at an example from the edTPA manual. As you can see, the table identifies some language demands and provides some planned language supports for each. For example, analyzing is a language function. And in order to support the students' analysis, a teacher could model analyzing characters for the students. Another example is vocabulary demands. So words such as caring, stubborn, they are vocabulary items which need to be learned by the students. A teacher could use reviewing vocabulary and word charts as a planned language support or a strategy to facilitate the learning of new vocabulary for the students. Another example that the chart identifies is a syntactic issue, which is descriptive sentences. If the students do not know how to use descriptive sentences, then a good way to teach them about it is creating sentence stems to show structure of description. This is a strategy that a teacher could use to facilitate the learning of this syntactic issue for the students. By the way, as you know, the word grammar and syntax are synonymous, and as you have noticed, edTPA uses the word syntax and the text uses the word grammar to refer to the same meaning, that is the structure of language. Alright, let's take a break for 5 minutes and we'll continue our work by looking at the 3 prompts that edTPA uses to test your knowledge of language objectives. Alright, welcome back. Okay, so the first prompt, as you can see, is asking the candidates to identify a key language function and one essential learning task within their learning segment lesson plans that allows students to practice the function. As you know from the previous slideshow, language functions are what students can do with language. For example, students will be able to define, students will be able to describe, students will be able to compare, etc. So here, as part of this task, you need to identify a key language function, which is basically what you have done as part of your previous assignment as well. So after Subat, you identify a key language function generally when you construct your objective. After you identify a key language function, you need to identify one essential learning task. And as you remember from the previous slideshow, tasks or activities are what students will do to reach the objectives. For example, as you remember from the previous slideshow, completing a worksheet on inferences was a task that the teacher could employ to help the students meet the objective of demonstrating an understanding of inferences. So simply said, the first task in edTPA asks you to come up with your content objective. So Subat is the fixed part of the formula. Then you need a function, and after that you need the content to be learned. And this is what is referred to as a key language function and one essential learning task. Let's take a look at example from the previous slideshow. So one key language function would be demonstrate an understanding of inferences. One essential learning task would be completing a worksheet on inferring the meaning of the 3 little pigs with at least 80% accuracy or better. This is the task. And you put these together and you create your content objective. So students will be able to demonstrate an understanding of inferences by completing a worksheet on inferring the meaning of the 3 little pigs with at least 80% accuracy or better. And as you remember, the content to be learned could be made very specific so that the teachers know exactly what needs to be taught and circle their efforts on the meeting of that objective. All right, so the second prompt would be about identifying vocabulary and one additional language demand related to the language function and learning task. So this is basically your language objective. This prompt is asking you to come up with your language objectives. Let's take a look at an example. As you can see here, one language demand is vocabulary, and here the vocabulary items which need to be learned have been identified as read, know, and infer. And one additional language demand has been identified as syntax. And by syntax, we mean sentence structure for making inferences. A language objective based on these two language demands could look like this. Students will be able to use sentence frames such as I just read plus evidence from the text, or I know plus own knowledge, and I can infer that plus inference to discuss the text with their peers before they complete their worksheet. So this is the language objective, which could help students meet the content objective of demonstrating an understanding of inferences. All right, the third prompt would be for candidates to identify and describe the instructional and or language supports they have planned to address the language demands. So this is practically the part where the teacher talks about the strategies that they're going to employ in order to facilitate the meeting of the language objective. Here are a few language supports to address these language needs. For example, the teacher could use a KWL chart with the students to activate their background knowledge and let them also monitor their learning. Another strategy could be modeling the new vocabulary for the students to make sure they know the words, they know how to use them, and they know how to pronounce them. And still another strategy would be using the gradual release of responsibility model to structure students' learning of the syntax of expressing inferences. These are just a few examples of strategies that teachers could use to teach vocabulary and syntax. You are familiar with many of them, and we also learn about them through the strategy demonstration workshops that we have. So to recap, the first prompt in the planning section of edTPA asks you about your content objectives. The second prompt asks you about your language objectives, and the third prompt asks you about your strategies or your instructional and or language supports that you have planned to address the language demands. To learn more about edTPA and how to address edTPA prompts, please check Canvas. There are sample files on Module 11 for you to check. All right, you've reached the end of our slideshow. Thank you very much for your time. Today's tasks are first, reformat your previous assignment according to edTPA prompts. So basically, all you need to do is to take what you have developed, what you have your content objectives, your language objectives, so take it and reformat it based on the edTPA prompts. So you don't need to add anything, you don't need to remove anything, so it's only fitting what you have into edTPA format. So when you're done, share your work on the discussion board and comment on at least 2 peers' posts. For the second activity, watch the video which was recorded by our guest speaker, and it has been posted on week 11 module. After watching the video, comment on it on the discussion board. All right, thank you very much. I wish you a very happy rest of the day.